Hi, I'm Professor Green, and we're going to be talking about Chapter 4, Listening Effectively from the Public Speaking Project. Let's go ahead and get started. So, listening is so important in this class because not only are we learning to deliver a speech, but we're also learning how to be a good listener to the rest of your classmates as they deliver their speeches. Let's go ahead and get started. This chapter is broken down into 6 or so different parts. We'll start with the introduction, which we call hearing versus listening. So really to go into what exactly it is that we're talking about in this chapter. Then we'll go into the value of listening here in the upper left-hand corner. Then the 3 A's of listening, barriers to listening, strategies to enhance listening, feedback to the speaker, and then how to encourage effective listening. So let's go ahead and move through our slides. First, hearing versus listening, right? If we've had parents, which we all do, very likely we've done hearing versus listening. Hearing is something most everyone does without even trying, right? Hearing is unintentional, whereas listening, by contrast, requires you to pay conscious attention. Our bodies hear, but we need to employ intentional effort to listen. So, as I've mentioned, if you have a parent, you've probably done some hearing, but not always listening, right? Sometimes your mom, your dad will be talking in the background and you're saying, yeah, 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 yeah. And then they say, are you listening to what I'm saying? And you really have to think about, did I actually hear what they were saying? So often we are hearing someone speak, but not actually listening. And how this is applicable in the classroom is that someone's delivering your speech, but you're on your phone, you're taking notes for another class, you're maybe on mute and and you're talking to someone else in the room. So again, especially when people deliver their speech, you truly want to listen because at the end of their speech, there's always going to be an opportunity for questions. And maybe you'll have a question or maybe you'll have a comment. So only by listening will we be truly able to address the speaker. So let's go into our first point, the value of listening. The first point here is academic benefits. So as the class, as the better you listen while in class, the better prepared you will be for your assignments and exams. None of you are first-time students here. Maybe you're first-time college students, but not a first-time student. And so as you know, when you come to class, when you do your readings, you're going to get a better grade in the class. Same thing. So you're going to be listening to whatever I say, whatever the students say, and then much, much better will be successful in the academic environment. The next one is professional benefits. So when we finally graduate from college, you'll go out into the workforce. And here is an academic researcher, Hop. He says he's connecting listening skills to better leadership. And it makes a lot of sense, right? If you've ever had a boss and you feel when the boss is listening to you, he has much better leadership quality, right? Than when he doesn't listen to his employees or he doesn't listen to his boss, right? Then everything goes haywire, kind of goes out the window. But if your manager is a really good listener, right? If you've ever had that experience, then things really come together. So Hop talked about that in his research in 2006. And so he lists many professional advantages of active listening, indicating that it better helps us to understand and make connections between ideas and information, right? It changes our perspectives and challenges our assumptions. It empathizes and shows respect or appreciation, which can enhance our relationship, and it builds self-esteem. So all those make sense, especially if you've already been in the workplace. You can see that if you've had a boss that is a good listener, he uses all of those 4 things to help him be a better leader. Great. And the last value of listening are your personal benefits, right? So communication effectiveness is determined by the level of shared interpretation of the message received through listener response and feedback. When done successfully, the loop is complete and both sender and receiver feel connected. So if you think back to a time when you were hanging out with your best friend and you were exchanging information, right? You felt connected. And that was because your best friend was listening to you and you were listening to her or him, right? And so important. And when that doesn't connect, right? So maybe you're talking to a parent or a brother or sister or a person that you just don't connect with, it's because very often they're not listening to you or you're not listening to them. So important, especially in these times of the pandemic, right? We want to make sure that we stay connected to people, and that is all done through effective listening. Let's go on to the next slide. So now we're going to talk about the three A's. The three A's of active listening. The first one here is attention. We know that attention is the fundamental difference between hearing and listening, right? Paying attention to what the speaker is saying requires intentional effort on your part, as we just spoke about. If you're not paying attention, then you're not listening, right? You're only hearing, but you're not listening, right? You're not comprehending, you're not digesting, you're not taking in the information. So you always want to be paying attention, right? And as I said in the past, right, students that pay attention do well. The next thing is your attitude. Approach the task of listening with a positive attitude and an open mind. That'll make the act of listening much, much easier. We'll go into this deeper further in this chapter, right? So if you come with a bad attitude, I don't want to be here, I don't want to listen to this, I'm not interested in this topic, I hate this topic, right? Then your attitude shifts what it is that you're comprehending, what you're going home with, what you're digesting about the speaker. The third part, 3A of active listening, is adjustment. If the audience members are more intent on reacting to or anticipating what is said, they will be poor listeners indeed, right? And so if you go into a speech and it's a pro-life speech, but you're pro-choice, right? You're already thinking about things that you want to say that are going to defend your stance and talk about the other side. But really what you're there to do is purely listen. So you need to adjust what you're thinking about, right? So if we're more intent on reacting or anticipating what they're going to say, then we're not actually listening, right? So that's an extreme example, but that's the idea, that we always want to remain open-minded. The next part of this chapter is called barriers to listening. The first one is anticipating, right? So already saying, oh yeah, I know what she's going to say, right? I know all about listening. I don't need to listen to this professor today. I'm really good at listening. I've been listening my whole life, right? So that's anticipating, right? Or if you're, as I said, if you're now pro-life and you're going into a pro-choice, then you're saying, I know what she's going to say. She's just going to say that, that abortion is, conception is, life happens at conception. I know what she's going to say. So I'm anticipating what the person's going to say. So we're not going to do that when we're effectively listening. Judging. We do this all the time, but we try not do it, right? We say, my opinion's better. Oh, I don't like the clothes she's wearing. Yeah, I wouldn't do that. I don't like the makeup she's wearing. I don't like the color of her skin. I don't like her background. I'm not really going to be listening to her today. That's judging, right? We don't want to do that because everybody has something to add and we're going to learn something from everybody. So we want to keep an open mind. Reacting emotionally. In the book, right, they say you start listening to someone talk about the death of their relative, and then you start thinking about the death of your relative, and all of a sudden your mind goes to that grieving process and how sad you were, and you're thinking about that situation. So it's not easy, right, to grieve. But the idea is that we're going to stay in the moment, right, and that we're going to stay listening to this person. And even though they're talking about the death of their relative, we're still going to stay with their story, right? So we're not going to react emotionally and let our mind take us out of the space. The next section is all about strategies to enhance listening. Let's go ahead and hop into that. The first one is keeping an open mind, right? I've already said that a handful of times, right? So we're going to also identify distractions. So those distractions can be mental, right? So not letting our mind run into different stories that are not happening in the actual classroom or wherever it is that we're listening to this speech. We're not going to worry about the clothes that she's wearing. We're not going to worry about her makeup. We're not going to worry about what's happening behind the speaker. As you notice here, I have a very plain and basic background because I don't want you to be distracted by things that I have on the wall or people coming going, right? So I'm going to try and keep it really simple so that you listen to this chapter. Also come prepared, right? Do some research on the topic. For this class, hopefully you've already read chapter 4, so you know exactly what it is that I'm going to say. And so with that, the mind is able to pick up the information a whole lot quicker, right? There's lots and lots of research on, right, the benefit of being educated, of the benefit of knowing more about what the speaker is going to say ahead of time, because then your mind is able to pick up the information so much more faster, exponentially faster than if you don't come prepared, right? And even if it's not academic, if an environment, maybe you're going to hear, President Trump, or listen to an old speech from President Obama, you're going to become prepared. You're going to read about the issues ahead of time. You're going to really understand what it is that he's going to be talking about, so that when he starts to speak, you'll understand a whole lot better. Good. And take notes. I highly recommend taking notes, because that allows you to then process the brain into the hand or into the typing. And then it allows you to absorb the information a whole lot easier and a whole lot better. And then you have those notes for later. You can review those notes. You can share those notes with your colleagues, give you something to talk about. So I highly, highly recommend taking notes. I actually built my career on taking notes. I became so good at it, right? So for 15 years, I became what's called a project manager. And I worked for large banks in the IT department, and I would connect engineers with the business users, and I would take notes during their meeting. They paid me a lot of money. I was an engineer. I also had a business degree, so it was very technical information. And I was able to process that information and then distribute that information, those notes, afterwards, so that everybody had the notes from the meeting and they could then follow up on those issues, right? So the engineers didn't have to worry about taking notes. The business users didn't have to worry about taking notes. I was a project manager who connected everybody. I took the notes, and then they had their tasks afterwards. And then the following week, when we met again, all I did was I reviewed the notes from the previous week, and I said, John, did you do this? Sally, did you do that? So you can make a lot of money by becoming a professional note taker. They don't call it that. They call it business analyst or a project manager. But the starting salaries for that are anywhere from 90,000 and above. So I highly recommend that you practice taking notes. Great. The next section is the feedback to the speaker. Let's talk about that. Here we're going to be providing feedback to the speaker. This is verbal feedback, as I already spoke about, right? Questions, comments. Very often we do that at the end of the person's speech, but sometimes they ask for questions and comments throughout the speech. And then also non-verbal feedback. So, so important, right? We've already spoken about that here in this course, that as a speaker is delivering a speech, they're listening and they're looking to the audience to deliver feedback, right? If the audience member is sleeping, if they're on their phone, if they're looking like this, then the speaker knows that they're not interested. What we're looking for is that listeners lean, right? That's usually something like this. You're leaning towards the camera. You're leaning towards the speaker if you're in an audience in a real live room, right? And so that tells the speaker that the audience member is listening to you, right? So super, super important, because then they'll start delivering their speech in a different way. If you're not listening, then they'll probably change their voice and they'll talk really fast, or they'll slow down their voice, or they'll whisper, right? Or they'll talk really loud to get your attention. But if you are listening, then they can go deeper and not have to worry about keeping your attention. And they can really go into details with their speech and maybe get more emotionally involved because they're keeping your attention. So it's so, so important to give feedback to your speaker. Let them know that you're listening. AKA turn on your camera. Super helpful in these Zoom sessions to turn on your camera if you're doing this synchronously. Let's talk about encouraging effective listening. So I think I've already hopped into that here a little bit. So you want to make your listeners care too. So when I deliver my speech here, as you see, I talk about my personal experience. I choose topics. Let's go ahead and open all of these here. We're going to cue our listeners. We're going to go ahead and ask them questions. We're going to talk about things that they're knowledgeable or interested in, and we're going to convince them to engage, right? So in this course, I don't necessarily talk about retirement benefits, right? Because I know that all of you are students. You're probably under the age of 60 when you retire, right? So a lot of you are in your 20s. So I'm going to be talking about topics that appeal to you, job decisions, looking for a job, academic pursuits. So I'm really going to make you hopefully care about this topic, care about public speaking, and I want to convince you to engage. I want to encourage your questions, encourage your comments. So this is the way that I get you to listen. When you give your speech, right, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to choose topics that you believe the audience is interested in, right? Saving the environment. You're going to talk about um, maybe study skills. You're going to talk about your trip to Mexico, right? So lots of different ways to engage and interact with the audience. Good. So that was our chapter on listening effectively. We went through those those main and subtopics. So the main topic, we started out with hearing versus listening, right? Then we spoke about the value of listening, the 3 A's of listening, barriers to listening, strategies to enhance listening, feedback to the speaker, and ways to encourage effective listening. Great. Does anybody have any questions? Again, I'm Professor Green, and this is Public Speaking from the Public Speaking Project and Chapter 4, Listening Effectively. Great, I'll go ahead and stop sharing. And thank you all for coming.